With big government comes big government investigations. It's really that simple. And in this era of COVID, pandemic related relief, fraud, we are seeing the government spend a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of messaging, a lot of money, a lot of headlines, taking down people who they believe are perpetuating this fraud. And in so doing, exploiting or taking advantage of hardworking people. My name is Justin Paperny. Our team is going to be producing a series of videos around payroll protection, fraud, investigations, how people get into trouble, the opportunities they seize, the collateral consequences that accompany a government investigation. So I'm super excited to be the leader in this course and in leading this class and helping you understand how one decision, even if you didn't have bad intentions, seizing a criminal opportunity, making one misrepresentation on a loan, saying one thing in order to secure a loan, even if you haven't spent the money, can get you in the crosshairs of a government investigation. And of course, once you're embroiled in a government investigation, the only goal is to try to emerge as unscathed as possible. Yet if you look at easily verifiable statistics, the lion's share of people who become embroiled in a government investigation, a criminal one, plead guilty. And unfortunately, the lion's share who go to trial lose. Again, if you're in trouble, what does mitigation look like? And what are you doing to prepare for the best possible outcome? To help get these points across, I'm going to refer to a blog or a lesson plan that a colleague on our team wrote. And I'm so incredibly grateful for our colleague in writing this to help me guide this lesson plan in this course. So let's go to our trusted screen share here as we get going. Again, thank you for your interest and attention as we learn more about payroll protection, fraud, sentences, the consequences, and how good people can become immersed in this system. Well, as we know, the government is paying so much attention to this that during the State of the Union, our president chose to build into his hour-plus remarks, with war going on in Ukraine, with everything that's transpiring in the world right now, he chose to use some of his precious time to say, the watchdogs are back. It goes to show you how big of a priority the Department of Justice is placing on payroll protection program fraud. And I haven't really seen it like this since my release from prison. In my case, I was released in 2009. And it was, as a former FBI agent said to me, in 2009, Justin, it was really the perfect storm of fraud. We had corporate fraud, we had Ponzi schemes. This was like the Bernie Madoff era. We had the real estate fraud, all these liar loans and banks imploding. Insider trading was very big at the time, not so much now. Then we had the regular frauds that are all bribery, corruption. I mean, that was the perfect storm, they had said. And it was difficult for the government at the time. As much money as they only have so many resources and capacity and people. It was tough for them to go after absolutely everyone. There's only so many investigations they could pursue. I remember an agent telling me in 2009, 10, 11, and 12, a lot of tax cases went by the wayside. They were prioritizing the mortgage meltdown in banks and people who were apparently defrauding all of these lenders. So now they are prioritizing payroll protection program fraud and punishing people they believe are leveraging off of this once in a lifetime pandemic. So important, the president said, during the State of the Union, the watchdogs are back. Continuing, as you would imagine, this administration, they all kind of blame somebody else. And he said, the president chided the previous administration, claiming that it undermined the watchdog role across the federal government, which led to fraud and corruption. It doesn't seem illogical that a Republican administration that believes in less government would probably turn the other way or choose not to investigate crimes to the degree that Democrats would, because they believe in bigger government. The government can solve our problems, or at least they believe that much more than, let's just say, the Republicans do. So it's not surprising that when Biden was elected, it was going to come with more government investigations. As I just mentioned, Biden is making the crackdown on cheating and waste a top priority. Specifically targeting will be any cheating and waste in government programs designed to help small business owners and individuals during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. There were several relief packages, as you know. The most recent one was a $1.9 billion one that now a lot of people are saying we have inflation because we threw all this money into the economy during a lockdown, and people come out and they have resources to spend and inflation is moving higher. So he's feeling the heat for inflation and everything that accompanies it. So for that, he's going to try to make sure that the money that was spent wasn't wasted, because he's already getting enough criticism, regardless of the aisle that you're on. He's getting it. A chief prosecutor for fraud and pandemic relief is on the way. Again, this is something that Biden said is going to be a huge priority. The president's announcement referred in part to the DOJ's plan to appoint a chief prosecutor for fraud and pandemic relief funds. The new chief prosecutor will work with the previously announced federal COVID-19 fraud enforcement task force to focus on the most egregious cases of fraud. So, as you can imagine, they're investigating these things 24 hours a day, piecing these things, subpoenas, interviews. Anytime if someone may get into trouble, for example, our company, we've had 8 or 9 people involved. We've worked with 8 or 9 people involved in payroll protection fraud issues. In one case, 4 of them were taken down by their accountant. So in that case, the accountant was encouraging their clients to apply for COVID relief funds. In some cases, they qualified, but did a little fudging of the paperwork to qualify for more funds. The accountant in return would get 5% of what they raised. In other words, you get a $500,000 loan, you're going to give me $25,000 in cash when you get it, because without me, you'd have only gotten $50,000 or $100,000. This is a $2 trillion passing. This is the way it works. There's a lot of government waste. Your business is struggling because of the pandemic. They want to put you out of business. They lock you down. So you have some fraudsters that leverage off the pain points of business owners. How are you going to meet payroll? People are going to be able to eat because of you. People are going to be on the street because of you. The government's giving away this money. This is a pandemic. You live in a blue state. You know, they're locking it down. They shouldn't. Didn't you see the governor just having dinner in a restaurant without his mask, yet you have to wear one? That's not fair. Regardless of where you feel politically, these are things that people say to get people to say, yeah, you're right, get me more money, and okay, I'll give you your 5%. So we've had a number of people, unfortunately, caught up in these cases and swept in by someone, and unfortunately, they choose to seize an opportunity. In this video, as we talk about some recent sentences, I'll offer my insights on what we know, and again, how these things happen. Federal law enforcement suspects that the government doled out about $100 billion in fraudulent COVID-19 relief funds, including the Paycheck Protection Program, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, pandemic-related unemployment insurance programs, and others. I mean, $100 billion is a lot of money, and they knew when they went into this there was going to be fraud and waste, but it is a lot of money. And to the extent that they can manage it and then punish the people who were caught, primarily for the deterrence factor, because in many cases the money's spent. The money's gone. You get a $500,000 loan. Some of it may go to the business. Some people flat out stole it, and they can seize and assets and get back as much as they can. But they understand the lion's share of it's going to be gone. So the reason they're issuing very long prison sentences, even if it's a first-time nonviolent offense, even if someone was swept into it, even if they had such pressure in their life that compelled them to cheat, you're going to continually hear the government say, we want to deter and make an example out of others. Even in some sentencing hearings, the judges know that defendant isn't going to return to the courtroom, knows without this pandemic they would not have broken the law, yet are still punishing with very lengthy prison terms because they want people to know what happens when you cheat people, you cheat the government, you steal, in their opinion, at the expense of others who are doing it the right way. I mean, there are some sentences here I've read where it's $50,000, $100,000. I'm not saying it's not a lot of money. It is. But relative to some white collar crimes, it is not. And it's government resources. They're still a victim, but not like some mom and pop who might have been stolen from and they're on the street. We're seeing some very long sentences when it's government or taxpayer funded money. You need to be aware of this. If you're an accountant, if you're an executive, if you're applying for these loans, they're going to check all of the paperwork. And anytime your bank is subpoenaed, they are going to turn it over because they're going to look for their interests first, not to protect yours. Everything you submit has to be clear. All the paperwork has to line up. The tax returns, they're going to check. You may get away with it initially, but in time, they're going to do their due diligence. And they have a whole enforcement going on right here as I'm discussing. The DOJ currently has thousands of cases nationwide against people alleged to have illegally obtained forgivable loans meant for small businesses during the pandemic. The DOJ has filed charges of pandemic fraud against more than 470 defendants. So as you may recall, when the pandemic hit, Trump was still in office. They passed this law that enabled you to get a loan. And if you qualified, the loan would then be forgivable. You don't have to pay it back, essentially a gift from the government to help sustain you. I believe in some cases, it was like 2.5 times your salary every month. So if you have a $5,000 salary. What is that? $12,500 you would receive, and then you'd have to submit paperwork to the bank. And I believe on your tax return that it was forgivable. Unfortunately, some people chose to say, I don't qualify for it to be forgiven, but I want it to be forgiven. I got this money. I don't want to pay it back. And they're investigating that as well. The total amount of pandemic-related criminal fraud formally prosecuted so far is $569 million, which sounds like a lot, but it's nothing. It's a fraction of what's really, it's a rounding here. It's nothing that's currently gone on. The Biden administration intends to intensify law enforcement crackdowns on people suspected of stealing billions of COVID fraud. And anytime they catch people, besides the press releases, we have midterms coming this fall, and you're going to have legislators out there talking about how they're punishing fraudsters and people taking advantage of this. And I'm on your side, and we're going to punish the people looking to cheat, and they're going to use it to advance their career. Something we talk about in every single video, understanding the stakeholders. In another PPP video that I'm going to film, guess what I'm going to talk about? The stakeholders. Who are they? What do they want? They want to advance their career. A politician wants to win. A prosecutor wants to catch cases because someday they're going to become a defense attorney. Do you understand the stakeholders and everything that you're doing? You need to, because I'm going to address it repeatedly throughout this course and all of the videos that any video our team creates, especially related to PPP fraud. Small business owners and anyone who received pandemic relief funds must remain on high alert as the government increases dedicated resources to scrutinize PPP and other pandemic loans and programs. Even people whose pandemic loans have been forgiven are not out of the woods because the federal government may yet allege fraud in the loan forgiveness process as well. I actually received a call from someone where they were told they were under investigation for loan forgiveness and ended up going away. It didn't change. The person had to hire a lawyer, was stressed, freaked out, and everything turned out to be okay. They had been tipped. What I mean is, oftentimes when the government indicts you or they serve you with a target letter, they interview you. You know what they often say? Is there anything you'd like to tell us? They love to catch cases. Again, I'll say it again. Understand the stakeholders. FBI agent would love to get information from a cooperating informant to catch more cases. In that case, it led to an individual. The FBI showed up. The FBI was told this person, didn't qualify for the loan forgiveness. It turned out they did, but it created a lot of heartache and stress in their life. So it also is another good takeaway here. Who are you speaking with? Who are you sharing your details with? You want to be careful with your business and what you're saying and what you're doing, because this person, who thankfully the case went away, may have shared something inadvertently with a friend who later caught a case, who then turned that information over to the FBI to try to save his tush to get a shorter prison term. When you hear you may be going to prison and you're target of a federal investigation, it's every man for himself, so to speak, in a lot of cases. You want to be very careful who you're doing business with, who you're sharing your business details with, your books, your records. Very important stuff here. We're talking about federal prison, government investigations. Even a civil lawsuit will wreck your week. That much I can tell you. The latest announcement is part of it's a tough word, reinvigorating. I should say it a few times. The focus on pandemic relief fraud across multiple federal investigative agencies. For example, the U.S. Secret Service recently selected a senior agency official to serve as the National Pandemic Fraud Recovery Coordinator. I mean, there's so many titles, there's so many divisions, there's so many titles, there's so many government bureaucrats whose only job is to ferret out fraud. The Secret Service has been very active in the effort to root out pandemic relief fraud. Secret Service investigations into unemployment insurance and PPP loan fraud have led to the seizure of more than $1.2 billion and the return of more than $2.3 billion of fraudulently obtained relief. I received a call 9 months ago from someone who told me the seizure, they had someone from the IRS, the Department of Justice, and they were literally pulling the diamonds off of this guy's wife. And there was an auditor or accountant from the IRS that was like, everything they seized, like Tiffany's diamond. Okay. I think it was a Patek Philippe watch. Did I say Patek Philippe correctly? Patek Philippe watch. And they're like itemizing it, and through all of these seizures and whatnot, it's turned out to be a little bit more than 1.2 billion and 2.3 billion of fraudulently obtained relief. That's a big number, but still a blip relative to everything that's been taken. That would be an interesting job, by the way, to be the auditor or the accountant for the FBI when they do raids and seizures, taking cars and boats and jewelry and watches and baseball cards and diamonds, to be the guy writing it all down. That would be kind of an interesting job to tally it all up. I wonder who does the appraisals on those as well. That could be a different video, perhaps. What does the COVID-19 fraud enforcement task exactly do? We're going to address that right now as part of this course. The task force mainly targets fraud schemes related to economic relief under the CARES Act of 2020. For some background, the CARES Act was passed in 2020 relating to, as we know, this COVID relief related to COVID and the devastation it brought on our country. Examples of fraud uniquely related to the pandemic include PPP, EIDL, unemployment insurance, fake vaccine passports, and price gouging of scarce resources. Our team has received calls for all of these, only one on the fake vaccine passport. It was actually a lawyer back east who got fired for turning in a fake vaccine card to his employer. That was a wrap, they said. But we have seen some of this price gouging of resources at the time. I believe it was masks primarily, right when the COVID pandemic was hitting and the government felt it was gouging and just, unfair. And of course, the business owner would say it's kind of supply and demand. It's just they needed it. I had it. When you have the supply, you can charge more because people need it. I get it. The government didn't feel right about business owners, in their opinion, exploiting people in need. The business owner would say it's supply and demand, nothing more. This is the way it works. Unfortunately, once, as I said earlier, once you're immersed in a government investigation, it's tough to emerge unscathed, as right as the business owner may have felt they were. In order to further reinforce the leadership of the task force, the government has named or will name a chief prosecutor to lead the various teams of prosecutors and federal agents. They will focus on fraud, people suspected of large-scale identity theft, domestically or abroad. Unfortunately, the identity theft has been, significant. You get access to someone's information. From there, you apply for all of these loans under their identity. You get them, you spend the money. And, that's real fraud. That is real criminal activity. And identity theft, by the way, comes with a mandatory minimum sentence. When people think of white collar crimes, they think of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, insider trading. Those don't come with mandatory minimums. Wire fraud may have a maximum statutory sentence of 20 years per count, but it's not a mandatory minimum. Identity theft is of at least 2 years. So there have been people caught and indicted and had pled guilty in identity theft for PPP fraud, very small amounts. I'm saying $40,000. We got a call from someone, I think it was Idaho. It was maybe under $30,000, but because it was identity theft, there was nothing he was going to do to get less than the 2 years. In fact, funny story, a lot of people who presume who have mandatory minimums presume they're going to get the mandatory minimum. They're like, Justin, why would I prepare for sentencing? The mandatory minimum is 5 years. That's what I'm going to get. The judge can't go lower. And our team will say, did you know that judges can go higher than the 5 years? So in this case, this defendant ended up getting the 2 years, but the judge was inclined to give him 3. Don't presume just because there's a mandatory minimum that you are going to get it. While some judges are sympathetic in this country to mandatory minimum sentences, primarily on drug offenses, right? Mandatory minimum drug offenses of 5 years. Judges may frequently say, I'd go lower if I could, but I'm stuck at this mandatory minimum. Some of that has changed, I believe, with the First Step Act. But never think for a moment that you're just automatically going to get the mandatory minimum. That's stupid. The COVID-19 Fraud Enforcement Task Force supports all law enforcement efforts to investigate and prosecute domestic and international criminal actors and assists agencies tasked with administering relief programs to prevent fraud per the DOJ announcements. The task force facilitates the sharing of resources and cooperation amongst various agencies so that resources and techniques to uncover fraud schemes are available across multiple agencies. Very common. In my case, way back when the FBI, I didn't have an FBI case, but it was an FBI agent, the IRS agent showed up with the FBI agent. Recently, a client, unfortunately, his home was raided. It was Department of Homeland Security, IRS, and the FBI. They're all working together. They're all cooperating. They're all sharing information, all under the idea of protecting the community and ferreting out fraud. In a number of cases, something that may start off as an SEC matter will, of course, get referred to the DOJ, and just like that, it's criminal. The DOJ task force and the chief prosecutor will continue to use state-of-the-art data analytics tools to track down identity theft and other complex fraud schemes committed across state lines or transnationally. The federal government will also continue to aggressively investigate fraud cases like the PPP loan program and unemployment insurance program. A big way, unfortunately, some people who engage in fraud commiserate with other people who engage in fraud. So a big way that they're catching new cases once they interview someone, as I said earlier, who do you know? Anybody else engaged in fraud? Would you like to try to cooperate and help yourself and get what's called a 5K, get a 5K1, which is a cooperation letter from the government in advance of sentencing that can lead to a significantly shorter sentence. Perhaps there's no bigger nugget or tool in the criminal justice system to get a shorter sentence than a 5K1 letter. So you can expect the government to ask anything you'd like to tell us, and sometimes people will roll over and give whatever they can because they're afraid to go to prison. That's how even the organizers or perpetrators of a fraud. Earlier, I mentioned this accountant who was engaged in this scheme with many, many clients, and he got 5% cash. Well, they found him first. So even though he was the orchestrator, the irony is he began to get cooperation credit by rolling over on all of his clients. It's like, wow, the orchestrator they found first, he's in a position to get more cooperation credit because they found him first. And sometimes people that are less involved or really on the periphery or tangentially can be punished just as severely because they may not have an opportunity to cooperate, because by the time the government may show up at your home and you offer to cooperate, they may say, sorry, we have everything. There's nothing more that we need to know. We have absolutely everything we need to build this case. So don't think for a moment, if you or you know someone, or if you're involved on the periphery and you didn't organize this fraud, that you could get less punished or a shorter prison sentence. It doesn't really work that way. The government favors cooperators. And while people in prison would call a cooperator a snitch, and snitches get stitches and all this prison parlance nonsense, the government views it as an essential step to making amends, an essential step to accepting responsibility, and an essential step to righting your wrongs. So don't give into this whole snitches nonsense that you hear in prison. The government views cooperation as an essential tool towards making amends, and as a thank you to making amends, as a thank you to catching cases, as a thank you to having the government spend fewer government resources investigating because you've teed up a case for them. The result perhaps could be a shorter federal prison sentence. I will also note you have to make sure you cooperate for the right reasons. Some judges will say, sure, you cooperated because it's only because you don't want to go to prison. You said, I'm sorry, only because you got caught. Got to have the right motives behind it. If they think you're doing it only, and I know you're cooperating to get a shorter prison sentence, or I know someone may cooperate in part to do that, but you want the government to believe it's for the right reasons. And if someone's made a mistake, if you've made a mistake or someone you know has made a mistake, do it for the right reasons. You should be remorseful and sorry. It may take some time to fully get that level of guilt and remorse and shame. The messaging has to be crucial. Messaging is something our team speaks about, every single day. The messaging has to be correct when you're dealing with a government stakeholder. Observers expect this announcement will result in hundreds, if not thousands, of new indictments of individuals and businesses who received pandemic aid. The DOJ requested that Congress provide additional financial resources needed for the DOJ task force to expand prosecutions for fraud. This is going to go on for a long time. It's like a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist who said, I will never be out of business thanks to Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, because people have such consciences online and they see things and they're insecure and they have problems and they fight. I will never be out of business, primarily thanks to Facebook. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. These prosecutors, government bureaucrats, will never be out of a job because this is going to be gone for years and years to come. And if anything, they're continuing to expand and spend much more money, as I just referenced. President Biden will also use executive orders powers to issue broad government-wide directives to prevent and further direct identity theft involving public benefits. At an appearance following the president's announcement of the chief prosecutor role, Attorney General Merrick Garlick added, as the president also noted in his address, I will soon be naming a chief prosecutor to lead specialized teams dedicated to combating pandemic fraud. The Justice Department is also working more closely than ever with inspectors generals across the federal government to identify perpetrators of healthcare fraud, procurement, tough word there, and every other kind of government fraud. As far as budget monies to fund these efforts, Garland noted that the president's budget request includes an additional $36.5 million for the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Criminal Division, which will help the department increase its actions to combat pandemic fraud. Let's keep rocking and rolling here, okay? Prosecutions and investigative notes. What we have seen thus far is the federal government's prosecution of PPP and other fraud is only the tip of the iceberg. In light of the news above, people ought to anticipate that the number of PPP loans and other pandemic fraud cases to increase by thousands. According to the most recent reports, the U.S. Secret Service has more than 900 active investigations involving fraud. A 30-year Secret Service agent, Roy Dotson, observed that he's never seen fraud on this scale during his 20 years working on complex fraud investigations. The U.S. Small Business Associations, one of the agencies on the front lines, told Congress last month that the crackdown work has just begun. The SBA's witness to Congress, SBA Inspector General Mike Ware, testified that it would be years before the SBA willfully knows how widespread the fraud is. Ware emphasized that in terms of the monetary value, the amount of fraud in these COVID relief programs is going to be larger than any government program that came before it. Let's get specifically into some pandemic fraud sentencing outcomes, the lengths, some of the details behind it. I'll offer some of my insights as well. So recently out of Ohio, there were some sentencings in the Northern District of Ohio that resulted in defendants being ordered to pay $500,000 and a variety of prison terms from 72 months to 66 months and 60 months. There's a number of reasons that people who may plead guilty to the same fraud in the same loss amount could, of course, get different sentences. Now, these are all pretty close, 72 months to 60 months. Some of these factors could include the person who got 60 months could be less culpable, could have contributed some money back in advance of sentencing if they stole, could have accepted responsibility more quickly. If I just said that, forgive me. If they accept responsibility more quickly, it leads to fewer resources invested in you. So there's a number of reasons that people can get prior criminal experience. If you plead guilty or you're convicted, a very lengthy pre-sentence report is completed. That pre-sentence report could include any prior criminal history. So for example, this guy who got 72 months could have done the same thing as the person that got 60 months, but maybe this guy has a prior DUI, some criminal history out there. Also, the judge may feel one defendant is more remorseful than the other. So there's myriad factors that go into why people who do the same thing and have the same loss amount could get different prison sentences. And I will tell you, I'm not saying 500 grand is not a lot of money. It is, but in my case, my restitution was $535,000 to UBS, I believe my former employer. I got 18 months. Myriad factors, every case is different, but it gives you a sense of what the government's pursuing. So 500 grand is a lot of money, split amongst 3 people, 6 years to 5 years, some very long prison terms here. The allegations against the defendants in the Ohio case stated that they conspired to apply for fraudulent loans for registered businesses with the understanding and agreement they would provide a portion of the PPP loan proceeds to another co-conspirator who acted as the recruiter. Very, very common. We see a lot of this. I know when the pandemic hit, I remember getting weird, unsolicited phone calls from emails and phone calls from people telling me I can get you a loan. And if I do and fill out the paperwork, you'll give me X back. I said, man, I'm a felon. I got enough problems. And I hung up the phone. Okay, so it comes down to be very careful who you're working with. Plus, friends of mine who applied for and got these loans said it took just a few minutes. And it was really super easy. But there were a lot of people working together to try to get these, including these recruiters. To further the fraudulent scheme, in this case, the participants lied about how many employees they had in their business, lied about the average monthly payroll expense, submitted false tax and bank records in support of their loan applications, and applied for fraudulent economic injury disaster loans and misrepresented the number of employees, revenues, and costs of goods sold for each business. So this helps explain why just a $500,000 restitution can lead to such lengthy prison terms, because it really, you see how detailed and thorough they were in engaging in fraud, right? There are a lot of judges who will speak about crimes of opportunity. In fact, Judge Lynn in the Jussie Smollett sentencing hearing discussed this recently. And this is very important when it comes to sentencing. The judge in that case said, there are people who road rage, didn't wake up with the idea to have road rage. They're impetuous. They don't think it through. They make a bad decision. Someone is struggling. They see a credit card in a department store. He said they use it. They buy something. They throw the card away. They do it just one time. It's a crime of impulse. Still a crime, but it's different if it's something that's systemic over a wide period of time. And you really have to be detailed when you're lying about how many employees, when you're fabricating and creating records about monthly payroll expenses, when you are submitting false. And I mean, the people who knew this knew that it was criminal, and they had to back it up and double down and triple down with more documents and more lies and more information that really, put them in a position. So it's sort of easy to see why in a $500,000 loss, they're getting such lengthy prison terms, because the detail and length and coordination was significant, unlike someone who might have just found a credit card, used it once, and thrown it away. The motivations, the length, and reasoning behind why someone breaks the law really, really matters. And in some cases, the judges feel these people are a risk to the community. Forget about deterring others to break the law. Some judges will say, you need to be in prison to be deterred from actually breaking the law. I think you're going to continue to do it. In this case, the defendants applied for more than 2.7 million. Rather than use the funds use the funds properly, they used the pandemic relief proceeds for benefit, cash, and luxury goods. They were convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So again, now you're seeing why only on 500 grand, why they're getting 5 years and 6 years. It was everything they did to get the money, and then they weren't even using it to try to keep a business afloat. There are people that illegally got loans to keep the business afloat. They didn't go buy it on Rolexes and cars and trips. They used it actually to try to keep the business afloat. That's part of why you're seeing such a disparity in sentences with PPP frauds. Even if there is a loss, the motives behind why someone did with the money and how they obtained it really matters to a judge compared to someone who lied to get the money and then they stole it. That's akin to just walking into a bank and stealing it. The difference in this case, rather than use a gun in a bank, they used their mind and their tongue and a pen to fabricate and get money. But in the end, it's stealing. And what they did with the money is unforgivable to a judge. And if you were to listen to these sentencing hearings, I presume the judge probably conveyed a lot of what I just said and why they need to be punished. Continuing in Florida, and this is all over the country. In a separate Florida case, a defendant received a sentence of 5 years in prison. In this case, the defendant filed 13 applications seeking more than 2.1 million. This activity led to a conviction for wire fraud and aiding and assisting in preparing false tax returns. 8 of the 13 applications were approved, resulting in the disbursement of 1.3 million. Again, if you were to look at what he did with the $1.3 million, forgive me, the phone's ringing, let me shut that off. If you were to look at what he did with the 1.3 million, there tend to be expenses on their paying off credit cards, buying homes, just very expensive type stuff, the absolute wasting of money. Let's continue on to Michigan. After pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, 2 men from Michigan and Georgia received sentences of 36 months and 33 months each. They had been under investigation since 2020. The investigation showed that between June 2020 and December 2020, they conspired with each other and others to obtain loans from the Small Business Administration. They discussed how to obtain PPP loans for non-operational companies and prepared false documents for submission with PPP loan applications. In the end, they successfully obtained almost 1.5 million. Of that, law enforcement seized and recovered 1.1 million, traceable to the defendant's scheme. The sentencing judge specifically noted the need and importance of deterring others from participating in such schemes in the future as a critical reason for the prison sentences imposed. The court also ordered defendants to pay back about 1.5 million in restitution. At sentencing, prosecutors derided the defendants as greedy, get-rich schemers who illegally took money from the Paycheck Protection Program and harmed small business owners and employees struggling through the pandemic. Again, it's understanding the stakeholders, right? A prosecutor is looking to get justice, of course. They're looking to punish people. That prosecutor someday is going to be a defense attorney. And most likely that defense attorney, when he's a defense attorney, there's going to be an online resume. Look at your resume. What's on your resume? You know what they are? They're accomplishments throughout your career, where you went to school, awards, what you've done well in business. It's your resume. Well, look at a baseball player's resume. Statistics, home runs, RBIs, pitcher, earned run average, strikeouts, walks. I mean, it's statistics. Statistics for government prosecutors are convictions, advancing their career. For years, I believe the U.S. attorney who indicted me when he became a defense attorney, my indictment was on his resume on the company's website. I don't blame him. That's what he's supposed to do. If you're a real estate agent and you sell homes, you're going to list the homes that you've sold to get more listings. It's just normal. So you can expect these prosecutors to fillet defendants in any crime, let alone people they feel are leveraging off this once in a century pandemic. To close, in criminal sentencing matters, defendants must prepare to counter the narrative that prosecutors present to the sentencing judge. Our company assists people with these sentencing mitigation strategies. So that's how I'll close one of a myriad, multiple videos our team will do around this payroll protection fraud. We know as Judge Lynn said in the Smollett case, that the majority of people don't wake up with intentions to defraud and break the law and go to prison. But there are opportunities that are frequently presented to people. And unfortunately, some people seize that opportunity, even when they know it's wrong, because they've rationalized their way into it, or they've been convinced or conned that they're not going to get caught. And this is the only way. So in every video that we discuss, we're going to be discussing the pressures people face, rationalizing those pressures and seizing criminal opportunities. And of course, the consequences that can accompany breaking the law. And we just went through some specifics out of Michigan, Florida, Georgia, and elsewhere. I'm Justin Paperny. Look forward to returning soon on our continuing course of payroll protection program fraud, how it's happening, how to prevent it, how to deal with a government investigation, and also to ensure that this is a situation hopefully you never find yourself in. Thank you for your attention and time. Look forward to returning for the next part of our course.